The female lead. Carter and her mother were on a late-night red-eye flight. After an unknown amount of time, Carter was startled by the sound of screams. She turned around and realized her mother was gone. At the same time, an announcement came over the intercom stating that the plane had encountered an uncontrollable storm. The pilot informed the passengers that the plane would be making an emergency landing and instructed everyone to fasten their seatbelts and remain in their seats. Suddenly, the cabin began to shake violently. At that moment, Carter heard someone speaking from the seat behind her. She turned around and saw an old woman who seemed to be muttering incantations. Could she be a witch with magical powers? Suddenly, the old woman opened her eyes wide and stared at Carter. Carter felt an excruciating headache, as if her head were about to explode. At the same time, the plane's engines exploded in extreme turbulence, causing the crash. By dawn, everyone had perished except Carter, who survived thanks to a plot device. She limped through the wreckage, her injured leg clearly visible in a brace. The scene shifts to 20 years later. Carter has grown up, started a new family, and had a daughter. A group of TV reporters arrived to interview Carter about what happened that night and how she was living now. Carter stated that she was doing well and had become a psychologist. She had learned to control her thoughts and overcome her fear of flying, because tonight, Carter was going to fly with her daughter to visit her grandfather. But had Carter truly overcome her fear? She had selectively forgotten the plane crash. It was evening, and the mother and daughter boarded the plane. But as soon as they entered the cabin, the daughter's behavior was unusual. She rushed toward row 19 as if possessed. Carter told her to come back because that wasn't their seat, and the daughter obediently followed her instructions. However, due to a blizzard, there were only 5 other passengers on the flight besides the mother and daughter. They were an elderly couple going to attend their grandson's wedding, and a man named John sitting next to Carter. There was also a wealthy man and a bearded man. Soon, the plane completed its de-icing procedure and prepared for takeoff. During takeoff, Carter heard a creaking sound coming from the cabin. She was extremely sensitive to this sound, because Carter was reminded of the plane crash from her childhood. She became very tense and anxious. John comforted her, saying it might be caused by loose screws on the plane. To ease her tension, Carter went to the restroom to clear her head. However, restrooms are off limits during takeoff. Strangely, the flight attendant didn't stop her. Once inside, Carter took the medication she had with her to alleviate her psychological trauma. Just as she finished washing her face and was about to leave, she heard her mother's voice outside the door. Carter opened the door and found herself back in her childhood home. She looked around and heard her mother talking to her younger self. Following the sound, she came to a door and heard her mother's voice becoming impatient. Carter decisively opened the door and found herself back on the plane. This time, Carter was confused. She thought it might be a hallucination caused by the medication she had taken earlier, so she didn't think much of it. As she returned to her seat, she noticed a shadow behind her. Carter sensed something was wrong, but when she turned around, the figure had disappeared. Suddenly, the flight attendant interrupted her thoughts and told her to hurry back to her seat. After returning, John accidentally saw the medicine Carter had taken. He reassured her that there was no need to be afraid, as dizziness was normal. Soon, the plane took off smoothly. After flying for a while, everyone gradually fell asleep. But what they didn't know was that red light suddenly flashed outside the window, and then many hands appeared one after another on the windows. No one was aware of what was happening. After falling asleep, Carter dreamed of herself as a child having dinner with her mother. Suddenly, she looked up at the glass and saw her mother covered in blood through the reflection. Carter was so scared that she couldn't even eat. Her mother noticed her strange behavior and asked Carter if the food wasn't good. Carter didn't answer and just kept staring at the mirror. Her mother turned her head to look at the mirror but didn't notice anything unusual. Carter asked her mother, "Are you really my mother? You're already dead, aren't you?" Her mother replied, "Are you kidding? If I'm not your mother, whose mother am I? How could I possibly be dead?" The plane accident had happened 3 months ago. They had only encountered turbulence at the time, but everything had calmed down afterward. "Your current condition must be caused by recurring nightmares." Her mother was so angry that she took away Carter's dinner. Suddenly, Carter heard a creaking sound around her. She asked her mother if she heard it too. Her mother replied that she didn't hear anything. Then her mother suddenly started convulsing like a broken robot. The sight of her mother's white eyes brought Carter back to reality. At that moment, the plane encountered turbulence and began to shake violently. The wealthy man spilled wine all over himself. The turbulence grew worse, causing the elderly couple to panic. The old man suffered a heart attack. He felt short of breath and fainted. The old woman hurriedly called the flight attendant for help. Although Carter was a psychologist, she was also a doctor. She rushed over upon hearing the commotion. Carter instructed John to perform CPR while she administered mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on the old man. Sure enough, the old man showed signs of life, but when he opened his eyes, they were white. He suddenly sat up, grabbed Carter's clothes, and said a sentence to her before calming down. Carter was so shocked by the scene that she froze in place. Under the flickering lights, she seemed to see a black hand appearing ahead, constantly dripping blood. The elderly man, who had collapsed, missed the optimal treatment time due to Carter's days. The elderly man died on the spot. and everyone failed to manage their expressions. What exactly happened? Suddenly, the plane began to shake violently, and the oxygen masks fell off. Everyone sat down and fastened their seatbelts. As Carter put on the mask, she saw herself in the past. She was on the plane with her mother, and the witch behind her was chanting spells. In a daze, she returned to reality, and the plane calmed down. Looking at everything happening around her, Carter realized it was all because of him. John asked, "Who is he?" Carter explained that she had survived a plane crash as a child, and she was the only survivor. Before the crash, an old woman had sat behind her, repeatedly chanting spells with her eyes wide and staring at her. When the old man grabbed her earlier, she had seen the witch. Carter believed the witch might have also boarded the plane. She was doing all this to complete what she hadn't finished before. She wanted to kill the only survivor through this flight. John said that she must have hallucinated from taking too many drugs. The plane had just encountered turbulence, which scared the old man into having a heart attack. Besides, why would the witch want to kill us by boarding the plane herself and dying in the crash? John urged her to calm down. Two flight attendants then placed the old man's body in the last row and decided to deal with it after the plane landed. After this little incident, everyone returned to their seats. A bottle of alcohol had tipped over during the turbulence and was dripping down. The spot below was where the wealthy man was sitting. The wealthy man saw this but didn't think much of it. He was distracted by the man with the big beard, who was touching his head and thinking. The wealthy man asked him if the old man's death had given him inspiration for his work, but the bearded man ignored him. The wealthy man began to mutter to himself, thinking that the bearded man was an intellectual and it was normal for him to ignore a fool like himself. He worked like a slave every day with no time to rest and just wanted to return to his family as soon as possible. The wealthy man spoke, then took out his phone and walked over to the bearded man, showing him photos of his son and daughter. But the bearded man didn't even glance at the photos. The wealthy man grew angry and scolded him, asking if he really thought he was an idiot. Seeing that the other man didn't respond, he gave up and returned to his seat. After the wealthy man left, the bearded man seemed to have found inspiration and began painting again. What he was painting was the wealthy man smoking. On the other side, Carter was still worried. She told John that all of this might be an illusion, because her leg had a scar from a fall when she was a child, but now there wasn't even a trace of it left. They were there when she looked in the morning, but now they were gone. John urged her to calm down, saying that no matter what, they were about to land and everything would be fine. Suddenly, Carter realized something was wrong. From takeoff until now, she hadn't seen the pilot's shadow. Only two flight attendants had appeared. There had been such a commotion earlier, yet the pilot hadn't come out to explain the situation. John said he wasn't in the mood to listen to her because his head was pounding, and he felt like it was about to explode. At that moment, Carter noticed that his daughter seemed to be talking to someone. His daughter replied that it was a girl in the back seat. Carter suddenly stood up, but there was nothing behind him. Carter asked his daughter what the other person had said. His daughter said, "She said you'll leave me again." Carter quickly hugged his daughter and told her not to be afraid. At that moment, the flight attendant announced that due to the intensifying blizzard, to avoid another accident, the flight would have to change course and land at Talmevo Airport. Upon hearing this, Carter grew even more anxious. This airport was precisely where he had lost his mother in a plane crash as a child. Meanwhile, the wealthy man was furious. He had been on the verge of reuniting with his family, but now he was delayed. He demanded to know why the flight attendant had changed the route. The flight attendant explained that they had no choice. She had already made it clear earlier that due to unforeseeable circumstances, they were concerned for everyone's safety. Upon hearing this, the wealthy man gave up and sat down in his seat, preparing to light a cigarette to ease his frustration. Meanwhile, his daughter sensed something was wrong. She grabbed Carter's arm and pleaded, "Don't leave me," because the girl earlier said that when a man catches fire, "You will leave me." Carter looked at the wealthy man and realized something was wrong. She rushed over to stop him from smoking. "I know you're curious why you can smoke on a plane. It's because this is a Russian flight." Everyone rushed over and used fire extinguishers to put out the flames. However, the wealthy man had already been burned to a charred husk, with only his last breath remaining. Seeing that the wealthy man was beyond saving, Carter prepared to return and search for her daughter, but she seemed to see a dark figure appearing in the seat ahead. Carter hurried forward to investigate, but the dark figure darted around the seats like a cat playing hide and seek. Carter took steps forward, searching, and eventually stopped in front of a seat. She stared at the glass, mesmerized, and suddenly realized she was on the sofa. At the same time, her daughter's cries snapped her back to reality. She lifted her clothes and looked at her legs. The wounds were still there, so she believed everything that happened on the plane was a dream. But do you really think the story ends here? After Carter came out of the bathroom, she heard a creaking sound outside the door. She approached the door and peered through the peephole. The flickering black shadow made her step back in fear. Suddenly, the shadow appeared behind Carter and covered her eyes with its hands. Instantly, the memories of her and her mother's ordeal flooded back into her mind. When she came to her senses, Carter heard her daughter's cries and rushed into the room to search for her, but there was no sign of her daughter anywhere. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was her daughter, shouting, "Don't leave me!" At the same time, the house began to shake violently, and all the furniture started falling. Carter panicked and opened the door, only to find herself back on the plane. Her daughter ran toward her and embraced her. At that moment, John called Carter over, hoping she could help the wealthy man. During the treatment, the wealthy man began to make sounds, as if he had something to say to Carter. However, due to his severe burns, he couldn't express himself clearly. The bearded man understood his meaning and raised the wealthy man's phone to show him a family photo. Seeing this, the wealthy man finally took his last breath and closed his eyes. At that moment, the old woman in the back row stood up, gave Carter a mysterious smile, and then entered the restroom. Carter felt that something was wrong and wanted to investigate. However, no matter how long he knocked, no one opened the door. Just then, 2 flight attendants approached and told him to return to his seat, as there was no one inside. But Carter refused to believe it and persisted. The flight attendants had no choice but to use a key to open the door, but the old woman was not inside. Carter was baffled. What was going on? He had clearly seen her go inside, yet she had suddenly vanished. The flight attendants scolded Carter, insisting he must have hallucinated, and told him to return to his seat immediately. With no other choice, Carter reluctantly obeyed. Suddenly, countless black hands grabbed her tightly and pointed to a number. Instantly, Carter saw the scene from her childhood again. The witch behind her was still chanting spells. When she came to her senses, Carter angrily accused the old man, believing that the witch was behind all this. Is your goal to kill me? Suddenly, Carter noticed someone closing a door ahead. She believed that the door ahead might be the exit to escape the plane. Regardless of whether it was true or not, Carter decided to give it a try. She wanted to take her daughter with her, but her daughter strongly opposed it. At the same time, the 2 flight attendants stepped forward to stop her, telling Carter that there was no exit ahead and that it was all her imagination. Suddenly, one of the flight attendants began vomiting water uncontrollably. It was as if she were drowning in water, and she continued until she choked to death. Seeing this, Carter became even more certain that the exit to leave the plane was ahead. She resolutely led her daughter forward. Along the way, Carter suddenly heard the bearded man muttering to himself about an unopened door and the unknown truth. At the same time, he drew the scene of the flight attendant drowning on a piece of paper. Carter noticed this and snatched the sketchbook from the bearded man. She discovered the scenes she had seen in it. This was very strange. How could the bearded man draw the scenes that Carter had seen? Carter demanded to know if the exit was really ahead. Before the bearded man could answer, his body suddenly burst into flames and turned to ash. Carter rushed to the door and tried to open it. At that moment, John and the flight attendant came forward to stop her. John said, "We're doing this to protect you." Carter asked, "Why protect me?" The flight attendant tried to answer but was suddenly pulled away by a mysterious force. At the same time, blood began to flow from John's head, as if he had been struck on the head by something. His blood spread throughout his body, and he eventually collapsed on the ground, no longer breathing. Now, the only ones left alive were Carter and her daughter. Carter used all her strength to break down the door, but behind it was still the aircraft cabin. Carter didn't care about anything else. She only wanted to get out of there, so she decided to walk through the cabin to the front exit. She opened the door again. As expected, the scene was still the familiar cabin. She opened countless doors. This time, Carter stopped in her tracks, because this cabin was the same one she had ridden in as a child. The seats were exactly the same as those in the opening scene of the movie. In a daze, her daughter suddenly disappeared. Suddenly, her daughter appeared in the 19th row of seats and called out Carter's name. A dark shadow appeared in front of her. Fearing that it would harm her daughter, Carter rushed forward to stop it. But halfway there, time seemed to slow down. At the same time, the witch's voice echoed in her ears. It turned out that everything had been an illusion created by the witch. In the real world, Carter was still on the plane about to crash. The witch was actually a soul guide trying to save Carter. She wanted them to survive the plane crash. She didn't want a child to see how terrifying death was, so she created all of this. But Carter was very strong-willed and kept struggling to escape the illusion, because Carter mistakenly believed that the witch was trying to harm her. She wanted to save herself from it. At this point, the witch gave up her spell and left the decision of life and death to Carter herself. The passengers who appeared in the illusion were all passengers on the plane in the real world. Each character in the illusion corresponded to the real-world cause of death. After learning all this, Carter's illusion was about to collapse. She hugged her daughter. Her daughter told her mother that if she wanted to survive the plane crash, she had to return to the past and listen carefully. Suddenly, the real Carter woke up. She realized how to survive. She had to sit in the 19th row seat. The scene returned to Carter's childhood. She and her mother were on the plane that was about to crash. The only way to survive was to sit in the 19th row seat. As the plane was about to crash, Carter desperately crawled toward the 19th row seat. With the plane's emergency landing, everyone on board died. In the end, the mother and daughter unlocked the survival achievement, and the story came to an end. The unusual scenes in the plane at the end were all explained. Actually, the daughter's unusual behavior had been foreshadowed earlier. Why did she insist on going to the 19th row as soon as she boarded the plane? Every action was hinting that Carter had indeed saved her mother after learning the truth. It was as if, in her imagination, The daughter had saved Carter. Carter had overcome her psychological shadow and saved herself.